I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue with the woman at the table. I didn't demand to speak to a manager. I just stood there, holding my purse with both hands while she scanned the list again. She looked up at me and said, very gently, "I'm sorry, ma'am, your name isn't here." For a moment, I thought she meant there was a spelling mistake. Or maybe I'd given my nickname instead of my legal name. So I said it again, slowly, clearly. And she checked again. That's when I knew. I wasn't forgotten. I was left out. Across the room I could see my son, laughing, relaxed, adjusting his suit jacket like this was the best day of his life. I remember thinking something very calm, very strange. He knows I'm here, and he's letting this happen. That was the moment I realized something much bigger than a wedding had already been taken from me. So let me tell you how it actually happened. I was 71 years old that morning. I remember that because I checked my face in the mirror longer than usual, the way you do when you're trying to decide whether you look like someone who belongs somewhere or someone who's just visiting. I chose a blue dress. Not flashy, not dramatic. The kind of dress a mother wears to stay out of the way. I had bought it months earlier, back when I still believed I'd be sitting somewhere near the aisle. Not in the front, of course, but close enough to see his face. I even pressed it myself. Old habits die hard. I left my house early, because I've always been early to things. School meetings, doctor appointments, his college graduation. Being late always felt like another way of not mattering. The venue was beautiful. Too beautiful, maybe. White flowers everywhere, soft music, people smiling in that nervous, excited way that tells you they belong. I walked up to the table at the entrance and gave my name. I expected the woman to smile and hand me something. A program, a name card, anything. Instead, her smile hesitated. She checked the list once, then again. Then she said those words. "I'm sorry, ma'am, your name isn't here." I laughed a little. Not because it was funny, but because my body didn't know what else to do. "Oh," I said, "I must be under family." She looked again. Still nothing. I could feel people behind me shifting, pretending not to listen while listening anyway. I hate that feeling. Being watched without being acknowledged. "I'm his mother," I said. That's when she stopped smiling. Not in a rude way. In a careful way. Like someone who's just realized they're standing in the middle of something uncomfortable. She leaned closer and said, quietly, "Let me get him for you." I didn't ask her to, but she already was. And as I waited, I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic, not anger. Recognition. Because this wasn't sudden. This wasn't random. This was the end of something that had been ending for a long time. When my son finally walked toward me, he didn't look surprised. That's what hurt the most. He looked inconvenienced, like I'd shown up to the wrong meeting. "Mom," he said, "what are you doing here?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "There must be a mistake." Just, "What are you doing here?" And that was when I understood. This wasn't about a guest list. This was about space. And I no longer had any. It would be easier if I could say the wedding was the first time I felt it. It wasn't. It was just the first time it happened in public. The truth is, I had been disappearing from my son's life for years before anyone ever checked a list and told me my name wasn't there. I just didn't have the language for it yet. Back when he was younger, he used to call me for everything. Big things. Small things. Things that didn't even matter. He'd call to ask how long to boil eggs. He'd call because a noise in his car didn't sound right. He'd call just to tell me he was tired. I never thought much of it. That's just what being a mother was, I figured. You stayed on call. Forever. But somewhere along the way, the calls changed. They didn't stop all at once. They thinned, like hair does when you're aging, slowly enough that you don't notice until one day you catch your reflection and think, when did that happen? He stopped calling during the week. Then he stopped calling unless he needed something specific. Then he stopped calling just to talk. When he met her, I told myself that was normal. That's what everyone says, right? He's building his own life. You can't expect to be the center anymore. This is healthy. So I swallowed it. I told myself I was being dramatic when I noticed he'd answer my calls while doing other things. Typing. Walking. Distracted. I told myself it was fine when conversations started ending quickly. All right, Mom, I gotta run. Yeah, I'll call you later. Later became next week. Next week became, I forgot. Eventually, it became nothing. Still, I didn't complain. I'd grown up in a time where mothers didn't complain about being needed less. You were supposed to feel proud, successful, replaced. But replacement doesn't feel like pride when you're the one being edged out. It feels like standing slightly outside the circle and pretending you don't notice. The first time I realized I was no longer welcome without notice was small. Almost nothing. I stopped by his apartment one afternoon with leftovers. Nothing fancy. Just a pot of soup I'd made too much of. I didn't knock loudly. Didn't barge in. I still had a key back then. When I walked in, they were sitting on the couch. Too close. Too quiet. She looked at me like I'd interrupted something sacred. Oh, she said, we weren't expecting company. Company. Not your mother. Not Mom. Company. My son didn't stand up, didn't smile, didn't ask how I was. He just said you should probably call before coming over. Probably. Not please. Not we'd appreciate it. Just probably. I remember standing there with the soup still warm in my hands, feeling foolish for thinking love could still arrive unannounced. I laughed it off, said I was just dropping something off. She took the container without meeting my eyes. No thank you, no warmth, just efficiency. That's when I started asking permission to exist in his life. I'd text before calling. Is now a good time? Let me know if you're free. Sometimes he answered. Sometimes he didn't. When he didn't, I waited. I didn't want to be a burden. That word, burden, has a way of settling into your bones when you're older. You start shaping your life around not being one. Holidays change too. I used to host everything. Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays. Then one year, she suggested rotating, which was reasonable. Then another year, they decided to go to her parents. Holland Kansi Blangim instead. Also reasonable. Then one year, I wasn't asked at all. I found out through a picture online. A table full of people. Smiling faces. Familiar walls. I zoomed in like I might find myself hidden somewhere in the background. I wasn't. I stared at that picture longer than I care to admit. Not because I wanted to be there, but because I wanted to understand when I stopped being part of the picture. When I asked my son about it, he sounded surprised that I was hurt. Oh, I didn't think it was a big deal. That phrase will undo you if you let it. I didn't think it was a big deal. It's what people say when something is a big deal to you and not to them. After that, I tried harder to be easy. Easier. I didn't give advice unless asked. I didn't comment on anything that could be taken the wrong way. I laughed at jokes that stung. I praised her cooking, complimented her clothes, stayed quiet when she corrected me in my own house. I wanted peace. But peace, I learned, often comes at the price of shrinking. And I was shrinking fast. By the time the engagement happened, I wasn't shocked that I found out late. I was only shocked that it still hurt. He called me days after everyone else already knew. His voice was casual. Yeah, so we're engaged. I congratulated him. Of course I did. I asked about the ring, the date, the plans. He said they hadn't figured things out yet. That turned out not to be true. They just hadn't figured out how or whether to include me. Every time I asked about the wedding, the answers were vague. We're keeping it small. Just close family. We don't want anything complicated. I heard those words and translated them the way mothers learn to. We don't know where you fit. Still, I assumed, foolishly, that I fit somewhere. You don't imagine a world where you don't. Not until you're standing outside a door you thought would always open for you. Looking back, the wedding list wasn't a mistake. It was a decision made quietly, long before that day. One text not answered. One invitation not extended. One conversation cut short. That's how erasure works. Not with cruelty. With absence. And by the time I stood at that table, giving my name to a woman who didn't know me, I wasn't being pushed out. I had already been gone. There's a moment, I don't know exactly when it happens, where you realize you're no longer loved for who you are. You're loved for how easy you make things, for how quiet you stay, for how little space you take up, for how useful you remain. It's not announced. No one sits you down and explains it. You just start feeling managed. That's the word that kept coming to me after the wedding. Managed. Like my presence needed rules now. Before, my love had been assumed. Now it was tolerated, as long as it followed conditions I never agreed to. I didn't notice it at first, because I was still doing what mothers do. I was adjusting. If I sensed she didn't like something I said, I stopped saying it. If my son went quiet when I brought up the past, I stopped remembering out loud. If they looked annoyed when I asked a question, I stopped asking. I told myself I was being respectful. What I was really doing was training myself to disappear politely. There was one afternoon that made it clear. They invited me over for dinner, not because they wanted company. I could tell, because it felt like the right thing to do. I arrived on time. I brought a bottle of wine. I even rehearsed being neutral on the drive over. Halfway through the meal, she started talking about how exhausting wedding planning was. How hard it is when people don't respect boundaries, she said, glancing at me without looking at me. I smiled and nodded. My son didn't notice, or maybe he did, and decided not to. She went on about how some family members expected too much access, how some parents don't know when to step back. Still, I said nothing. I took a sip of wine and waited for it to pass. Then she said it. Some moms don't realize their sons grow up. The table went quiet. I waited. I waited for my son to say something. Anything. A joke. A redirect. A gentle defense. He didn't. He kept eating. That's when I felt it. Not anger. Not humiliation. Something colder. Replacement. I realized then that love wasn't unconditional anymore. It came with expectations. Don't show up uninvited. Don't ask too many questions. Don't remind him of who he used to be. Don't need too much. And above all, don't make her uncomfortable. I went home that night and cried quietly in my kitchen. Not because of what she said, but because of what he didn't. I started thinking back over the years, all the ways I had been there when things were inconvenient. The nights I stayed up waiting for him to get home safely. The money I lent without keeping track. The holidays I rearranged around his schedule. I never once asked what it cost him. Because love wasn't transactional to me. But somewhere along the way, it had become that way to him. There was a shift, subtle but undeniable, where I was no longer his mother. I was his responsibility. And responsibilities are managed, trimmed, minimized. That realization followed me everywhere. When I hesitated before calling him, when I rewrote text messages to sound lighter, when I convinced myself I didn't need answers, I had become careful. And careful love isn't love, it's survival. The wedding wasn't the first time I was excluded. It was just the first time I was told so clearly. Standing at that table, watching my son avoid my eyes, I wasn't just being left out of a ceremony. I was being reminded of my new place. Outside. Peripheral. Optional. And the worst part? He thought I would understand. Because I always had. Because I always adjusted. Because I had taught him, without meaning to, that I would shrink to preserve peace. That realization hurt more than the exclusion. It meant I had helped create the conditions under which I was erased. Not through weakness, through love. People imagine decisions like mine come with speeches, raised voices, ultimatums. Doors slammed hard enough to make a point. Mine didn't. It came while I was standing at my kitchen sink, days after the wedding, staring at a mug I'd already washed twice. The house was quiet. Too quiet. That kind of quiet that makes you realize how much noise you used to live around. Phone calls, plans, expectations, and how suddenly it's all gone. I hadn't heard from my son since the wedding. Not a text, not an apology, not even an explanation. And that silence did something important. It told me exactly where I stood. For the first time, I didn't rush to fill it. I didn't send a message asking if everything was okay. I didn't reassure myself that he was busy. I didn't make excuses for him in my own head. I just stood there and let the quiet stay quiet. That's when I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. If I stop reaching, nothing will reach back. And instead of terrifying me, that thought settled me, because it meant the work had been one-sided for a long time. I thought about all the small ways I had kept myself available. The phone always charged. The calendar always open. The answers always kind. I thought about how quickly I'd learned to apologize for things I didn't do. I didn't mean to overstep. I'm sorry if that bothered you. I didn't realize. I couldn't remember the last time he'd said he was sorry. Not really sorry. Not the kind that sits with you and doesn't rush past. That afternoon I made a decision. Not to punish. Not to teach a lesson. Just to stop. I stopped calling. I stopped checking my phone for missed messages. I stopped planning holidays around someone else's comfort. I didn't block anyone. I didn't make an announcement. I simply stepped back into the space I'd been slowly pushed out of. At first it felt wrong. Like neglect. Like I was breaking some unspoken rule of motherhood. Mothers don't withdraw. They endure. But endurance had cost me my dignity, and I was tired of paying that price. The days passed quietly. I noticed how often I'd reach for my phone out of habit, how my hand would hover, then lower. I started doing small things for myself. Long walks in the morning. Reading without checking the time. Eating dinner when I was hungry, not when it fit someone else's schedule. None of it was dramatic. But it was new. A week passed. Then 2. Still nothing. And that confirmed what I already knew. The relationship only existed when I carried it. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Because I wasn't doing anything. I was letting the truth reveal itself. It was about a month later when my son finally noticed. He called one evening, his tone light, almost casual. "Hey, Mom. Everything okay? Haven't heard from you in a while." There it was. Not "I'm sorry," not "I've been thinking about you." Just, "You've been quiet," like silence was a problem only when it inconvenienced him. "I've been fine," I said, and I meant it. There was a pause. "Well, we've been busy," he said. "You know how it is." I did know. That was the problem. He didn't ask how I'd been. Didn't ask if the wedding had hurt me. Didn't ask why I hadn't reached out. He just filled the space with his life. I listened. Then he said, "So are you coming by this weekend? We've got some things we could use help with." Help? Not a visit. Not time together. Help. That was the moment the decision settled fully into place. Not sharp. Not angry. Final. "I won't be able to," I said. "Oh," he replied. "Why not?" I have plans. I didn't explain. I didn't soften it. I didn't rearrange myself. The silence on the other end was heavier than before. Okay, he said eventually. Well, let me know. I hung up and felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Because for the first time, my absence wasn't filled with guilt. It was filled with clarity. I wasn't walking away from my son. I was walking back into myself. And that, quietly, changed everything. At first, nothing happened. That's the part people don't expect. When you stop reaching, the world doesn't immediately shake. No one panics. No apologies come rushing in. Life just keeps going. And that's how you know how necessary you really were. The first few weeks after I stepped back, my son didn't call again. Not once. Which told me everything. He wasn't missing me. He was missing access. Still, I stayed quiet. Not out of pride, out of respect for the truth that was unfolding. I had learned over the years that when someone really wants you in their life, they don't need reminders. They notice the absence quickly. Months passed. I began to hear about things indirectly. A holiday they spent with her family. A weekend trip they took without mentioning it. A small gathering where my name never came up. And then, slowly, the tone shifted. The calls came back. But different. Short. Practical. Do you still have that old paperwork? Do you remember where I put? Do you mind if I stop by to grab something? Not how are you? Not I miss you. Just function, I answered politely. Briefly. I didn't rush to fill the gaps anymore. That confused him. You could hear it in his voice. Like a person who had always expected the light to turn on automatically, suddenly flipping the switch and finding nothing. One afternoon, he showed up at my door without calling. Old habits. I opened it and saw surprise flicker across his face. Not anger. Not guilt. Surprise that I didn't look relieved to see him. Hey, he said. I was in the area. I stepped aside and let him in. I wasn't unkind. I just wasn't accommodating. He sat at the kitchen table like he always had. Looked around. You changed the curtains, he said. I did, I replied. He nodded, like that explained something. Then he got to the point. I've been meaning to ask, did I do something? There it was. Not, did I hurt you? Did I do something? As if my distance was a puzzle, not a response. I thought about all the things I could say. About the wedding. About the years of shrinking. About how small I had felt standing outside that venue. But I didn't say any of it. I needed some space, I said. He frowned. For what? I looked at him for a long moment. And realized something important. He genuinely didn't know. Not because he was cruel, but because he had never learned to look backward. He lived forward, assumed forgiveness, expected continuity. I said, I've spent a long time adjusting myself so you'd be comfortable. I needed to stop doing that. He shifted in his chair. That wasn't my intention, he said quickly. I believed him. Intent and impact rarely meet in the same place. I know, I replied, but it was still happening. He nodded slowly. Uncomfortable now. He stayed another 10 minutes. Talked about work, about plans, about nothing that mattered. Then he stood up and said, Well, call me. I didn't promise I would. After that visit, something changed. He started noticing. The way I wasn't always available. The way I didn't rearrange plans. The way I didn't hover. At first, it irritated him. Then it unsettled him. And finally, it worried him. Because absence, when it lasts long enough, forces reflection. And reflection is uncomfortable when you've benefited from someone's silence. I could feel the shift. Not through words, through tone, through hesitation, through the way his voice softened when he called. Still, there were no apologies, just confusion, and that told me something else. He was beginning to understand that something had changed, but he didn't yet understand why. That understanding was coming. Slowly. He just wasn't ready for what it meant. The first time my son really felt my absence wasn't during a holiday. It wasn't on his birthday. It was on an ordinary Tuesday. Those are the moments that hurt the most, when there's no audience, no significance to hide behind. Just real life, suddenly heavier. He called me late that evening. I could hear it in his voice before he said anything. Something was wrong. "Mom?" he said. "Are you busy?" I was sitting in my living room with a book open in my lap. "I have time," I said. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. "We had a rough day," he said. "Work stuff. Stress. You know." I did know. I had known for decades. He used to call me on days like this without even thinking about it. I waited. Silence stretched. He wasn't sure how to continue. Finally, he said, "I don't really know why I'm calling." That was the truth slipping out. "You don't have to know," I said gently. There was another pause, then, quieter. "I guess I just needed to hear your voice." That sentence landed heavier than anything else he could have said, because it confirmed what I already knew. I had never stopped being important. I had just stopped being prioritized. He started talking then. About work. About pressure. About how tired he was. I listened. The way I always had. But something was different. I didn't jump in with solutions. I didn't reassure him automatically. I let him sit with his own feelings. When he finished, he waited. For comfort. For absolution. For me to smooth everything out the way I used to. I didn't. "I'm sorry you're having a hard time," I said. "That sounds heavy." That was it. No fixing, no rescuing, he noticed. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm listening," I replied. Another silence. This one uncomfortable. "Did I hurt you?" he asked suddenly. There it was. Not fully formed yet, but closer. I thought carefully before answering. "Yes," I said. Just one word. No list. No accusation. It stunned him. "I didn't mean to," he said quickly. "You know that, right?" "I do," I replied. "But meaning to and doing to aren't the same thing." He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said something that told me he was finally beginning to understand. "I guess I thought you'd always be there," he admitted. That sentence broke something open between us. Because it was honest. And honesty, even late, matters. I said. "I just wasn't supposed to disappear in the process." He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just sat with it. "I didn't realize how much you carried," he said finally. I closed my eyes. "I didn't either," I answered. After that call, things changed again. Not back. Forward. He became more careful, more thoughtful, but also more distant. Because awareness brings guilt. And guilt is uncomfortable. He started calling less. But when he did, he listened more. He asked questions. Real ones. "How have you been? What are you doing lately? What do you want?" Those questions would have meant everything years earlier. Now they felt like echoes. Not because I didn't appreciate them, because they came after I had already learned to live without needing them. One afternoon, he asked if we could talk in person. I agreed. We sat across from each other at a small cafe. He looked older than I remembered. Tired. Humbled. "I owe you an apology," he said. I waited. "For the wedding," he continued. "For not standing up for you. For letting you feel like you didn't matter." I nodded. "I hear you," I said. "That wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement." "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. I believed him. "Some things don't get fixed," I said gently. "They get understood." He swallowed. "Is there any way back?" he asked. I looked at him then. Really looked. at the man he had become, at the boy I had raised, and at the space between us. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm still figuring out who I am without carrying everyone else. He nodded, and for the first time, he didn't push. He didn't ask me to reassure him. He let the uncertainty sit. That was progress. But progress doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it just means acceptance. There's a strange grief that comes with clarity. It isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It just sits with you. After that conversation at the cafe, my son and I didn't suddenly become close again. We didn't start calling every day. We didn't revisit old traditions. We didn't pretend nothing had happened. What we did instead was learn how to exist in the new shape of things. That shape had space in it. Distance. Boundaries that hadn't been named before because I didn't know I was allowed to have them. At first, I wondered if I had made a mistake. If stepping back had cost me something, I'd never get back. There were nights I lay awake thinking about the child he once was. The way he used to fall asleep on my chest. The way he reached for my hand without looking. The certainty he had that I would always be there. And I questioned myself. Was dignity worth this? The answer didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. It came the first time I spent a holiday alone and didn't feel lonely. The first time I made a decision without checking if it would disappoint someone else. The first time I realized my peace wasn't fragile anymore. My son started visiting occasionally. He always called first now, always asked if it was a good time. He brought flowers once. It felt awkward, like something learned late. We talked about surface things mostly. Work, weather, small updates. We avoided the deep places, not because they were forbidden, but because they were tender. I could see he was trying. And I appreciated that. But effort doesn't erase history. It acknowledges it. One afternoon, as he was leaving, he stopped at the door. "You seem different," he said. I smiled. "I am," I replied. "Better?" he asked. I thought for a moment. "Truer," I said. He nodded slowly. Like that answer made sense to him, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. I don't know what our relationship will look like in 10 years, or if there will be moments when the distance closes naturally. I've stopped predicting. What I do know is this: love that requires you to disappear isn't love that sustains you. And motherhood doesn't mean accepting erasure as the price of peace. I didn't stop loving my son. I just stopped loving myself less. The wedding list was never really about the wedding. It was about a quiet removal that had been happening for years, and about the moment I finally noticed and chose not to beg my way back in. I still think about that day sometimes. Standing there, hearing my name wasn't on the list, feeling small, unseen. But now, when I remember it, the feeling is different. It's not shame anymore. It's clarity. Because that was the moment I stopped asking where I fit and started deciding. I still keep my phone on the kitchen counter, not because I'm waiting for it to ring, just because that's where it belongs. Some habits don't disappear, just because the reasons for them do. Every now and then, my son calls. Sometimes I answer, sometimes I don't. Not out of punishment, out of honesty. I no longer rush myself into availability just to prove I still matter. I already know I do. There are days I think about the woman I was before all of this. The one who believed love meant endurance. The one who thought being needed was the same as being valued. The one who would have stood outside any door and waited. I don't judge her. She loved deeply. She just didn't know she was allowed to rest. I've learned that some relationships don't end. They recalibrate. They settle into a quieter truth, less illusion, more self-respect. People ask me sometimes if I regret stepping back. I tell them no, because what I gained wasn't distance, it was myself. I still love my son. That never left, but love doesn't mean vanishing. And family doesn't get to erase you quietly just because you don't make noise when it happens. These days, my life is slower. Not empty. Full in a different way. And when I sit alone in the evening, with the light fading just enough to remind me time is passing, I don't feel abandoned, I feel complete, because I finally learned the difference between being included and being whole.